Hey everybody, welcome to the Shanty. It is a beautiful spring day here in the Shanty. It's in the 60s and the breeze is blowing and the sun is shining, and tomorrow it's going to be 85. So we get one nice day of spring here in Michigan like we always do, and then we go right to summer, from winter to summer. At least it's warm and not cold. That's all I can say. So I'm going to be happy about it, and we're going to move on to other great and fabulous news that you as employers are facing. So let me start with a thank you for all of you who came to our in-person seminar last week. It was a great success. At least I hope it was for you. Hope you enjoyed it, but thanks for coming. It was kind of nice to be out in a group of people again, in public. A little weird, but kind of nice. So hopefully that's a sign that we've gotten through the worst of COVID and that we're on the tail end of it. And one of the things that I talked about or moderated a panel on was the Great Resignation and this problem we've been having with finding employees and pay rates going up and all of this other good stuff that we're having. So I thought today I would give you some good news. The National Labor Relations Board is getting really, really active. That's not good news. It's bad news. Sorry. I was only kidding. And when I say really, really active, let me just say this, that for those of you that don't have a union, before you shut this thing off, this is for you. It's not for those of you that already have a union, although there's some issues there too. It's for those of you that don't have a union that might get a union. And if you don't think you're going to get a union, you might be right and you might be wrong. But let's start out with some statistics. On April 6th of this year, the NLRB issued their election petition statistics in a press release from the Office of Public Affairs of the National Labor Relations Act. And they start out the press release by saying the following. Quote, during the first 6 months of fiscal year 2022, October 1 through March 31, union representation petitions filed at the NLRB have increased 57%. Up to 1,174 from 748 during the first half of fiscal 2021. At the same time, unfair labor practice charges have increased 14% from 7,255 to 8,254, period, end quote. Now, I don't know if the board thinks that's good news or bad news, but I think it's bad news. I don't think it's good news that election petitions have gone up. And I don't think it's good news that unfair labor practice charges have gone up. Then the press release goes on to complain about funding, because, that's what government agencies do. And then they said the following. Last week, President Biden released his fiscal 2023 budget, which requests $319.4 million for the NLRB, a 16% increase, which will help start modernizing the agency's technology infrastructure, but will not fully address staffing needs. As detailed in fiscal 2023 congressional budget justification, more than 3/4 of the NLRB's budget goes directly to staffing costs. That's not surprising. A lot of your costs go to staffing costs too, so that's not surprising. So what do we have? We have more activity at the NLRB. We have more people filing petitions for secret ballot elections for union representation. We have more unfair labor practice charges being filed, and we've got the board complaining about not having enough money. What we also have is a new general counsel. Some of this is not surprising to me because we have an administration now that is as labor friendly as any administration we've ever had. And we have a GC who's as union friendly as any administration we've ever had, maybe ever. Okay? And why do I say that? Well, I say that because Jennifer Abruzio, the current GC of the NLRB, has made a lot of public statements about things that she wants to change that is going to make life easier for unions when they come and try to organize your workforce. The first thing she said is that she wants to go to a card check model and not a secret ballot election model. Now, to me, that seems anti-democratic, but that's just me. And you'll remember a number of years ago during the Obama administration, we had that whole move to go to a card check model by law. And what I mean by a card check model is this. When a union comes and knocks on your door, if you don't know this, they give employees, as they're trying to organize them, a little card. It's actually a card that would fit in your wallet. It's a union representation card. And the unions will often say to employees, this doesn't mean anything. This just means you want an election. In fact, what the cards almost always say is, by your signature below, you authorize this union to represent you with this employer in terms of collective bargaining, or something like that. That's a paraphrase. In other words, the card is an employee saying, I want this union to represent me. Then what the unions will do is when they get these cards, when they get 50% of the workforce plus one person to sign these cards, usually they go for a higher number than that, because traditionally all the cards have really gotten them was the election that they said the cards was going to give them. But they take them to the employer. And if the employer looks at the cards and goes, oh man, 52% of my people have signed these cards, the employer no longer has a good faith doubt about majority status, and that can get rid of the secret ballot election, and boom, you've got a union and they're recognized, and now you have to bargain. A card check model does that by rule. You have to look at the cards, and if they've got 51%, there's a union. 50% plus one person, there's a union, and no secret ballot election. That's not a good thing, because often you don't even know the union's on the scene until they show up with the cards. So it doesn't give you an opportunity as an employer to give your feelings about unionization. And that's where the next thing, and that's a bad thing. Now here's where the next thing that Ms. Abruzio wants to do is a bad thing. She's now going after what have traditionally been called, quote unquote, captive audience speeches. Okay? Now, what a captive audience speech is, for those of you that don't know, is it's where an employer requires employees to attend a meeting during which the employer shares their views on unionization. Ms. Abruzio wants to make those meetings unlawful. Now, for the last 50 years, those meetings have been completely lawful, as long as you don't, during that meeting, threaten or promise the employee, threaten the employee with bad things happening if they join the union, or promise the employee good things if they join the union. As a matter of fact, those meetings, that kind of conversation, are codified in the National Labor Relations Act. Section 8C of the NLRB says the following, or the NLRA, says the following. Expression of views without threat of reprisal or force or promise of benefit. Quote, the expressing of any views, argument, or opinion, or the dissemination thereof, whether in written, printed, graphic, or visual form, shall not constitute or be evidence of an unfair labor practice under any provision of this act, if such expression contains no threats of reprisal or force or promise of benefit, period, end quote. Now, despite that, Ms. Abruzio thinks that these captive audience speeches are illegal, even though the board for 50 years has said they're legal. And she issued a press release, actually a memo, not a press release. She issued a GC memo to the region saying, we're going to go after these captive audience speeches. And she said this in the memo, quote, the license to coerce is an anomaly in labor law inconsistent with the Act's protections of employee free choice. It is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of employers' speech rights, end quote. Quote, I believe that the NLRB case precedent, which has tolerated such meetings, is at odds with fundamental labor law principles, our statutory language, and our congressional mandate. Because of this, I plan to urge the board to reconsider such precedent and find mandatory meetings of this sort unlawful, period, end quote. Now, to me, that is Jennifer Abruzio, this is my opinion only, completely getting the statute wrong. The statute says we can talk to you about our opinions, we can give you written materials about our opinions, and as long as we don't threaten you or promise you something, that's legal. And it seems to me that is consistent with the First Amendment. Now, I know the First Amendment doesn't apply to private employers, but the First Amendment certainly does apply to the government, the NLRB, saying to private employers, you can't talk to your employees. That seems to me to be a fundamental First Amendment right. And we're going to get a chance to find out what the courts think. Because Ms. Abruzio has got her test case. Unfortunately for her, unfortunately for all of us, her test case is Amazon. And Amazon got lots of money to spend on lots of lawyers to fight this issue. So the NLRB has issued a complaint alleging that Amazon, in a captive audience speech, made threats of dismissal against its employees. And supposedly there is an audio recording of this that the union has. All right? And they've shared it with some of the news organizations. So Ms. Abruzio's got her test case. Now, the test case seems to me is going to revolve around two things. Number one, the issue of threats. If they actually made the threats, that's been illegal all along. But this is her opportunity to find out if a captive audience speech per se is illegal. I don't think it is. As a matter of fact, I think the language of the statute makes it clear that it's not. Not even a regulation, the statute. We'll see what the courts have to say. Unfortunately, you guys won't have to pay for it. Amazon can pay for it. Now, with all of that said, what do we do about this? Why is this of interest to us? Well, it's of interest to us because, as you can see as we go down this road, it's really, really important that you have a strategy for interacting with and building the trust of your employees, right? How do we prevent a union? Normally, we would have had plenty of time to do that. We would know, we'd still want you to do all this stuff, but we'd at least know that the union was coming. They'd present us with cards. We'd refuse to look at them. An election would be scheduled. We'd have some time. Although you recall under the the Obama administration, there was a plan to shrink that time between the time the petition was filed and the election was held. But there'll be some time and we can conduct a union campaign. Just like the union gets to conduct a campaign, the employer gets to conduct a campaign. That's going to be, if these things pass, way more difficult. If card checks become the norm, you better know that the union is out there trying to get your employees to sign cards. And if captive audience speeches are illegal, you better be talking to your employees all along to make sure they understand your opinion of unionization. Now, what causes people to want to join unions? Well, the easy answer is paying benefits, which is also what we talked about causing people to quit in the Great Resignation. Not necessarily paying benefits, although they are almost always an issue. But there are other things that cause people to want unions, like fair and consistent treatment under your policies. Do you have an open door management policy? Do your employees trust you? Okay, something that I emphasized and the panel emphasized when we talked about the Great Resignation. Have you built trust with your employees? So all of those things that we wanted you to do to keep people from quitting, we want you to do to keep the union out too. So start thinking, that's another reason to do that. And as I said in the HR seminar, for those of you that heard me, is another reason to make sure your supervisors, who are your front line in all of this, make absolutely sure they know what they're doing, what their job is, how they should be talking to people. Because when an employee comes to your supervisor and says, hey, this guy, he wants me to sign this union card, and I'm not sure if I should do it or not, your supervisor better know how to respond to that. Because we want supervisors to communicate with employees. We want the employees to know that the supervisor thinks a union is not a good idea and gives their opinion on that. Now, here's what you can't do. Something I want you to remember, it's really simple. It's an acronym, it's called TIPS, and we've been using this forever in union organizing campaigns, but I'm going to give it to you now, even before you have a union. It's TIPS, T-I-P-S. This is what your supervisors cannot do when they're asked by your employees about a union. TIPS, T, threaten. They cannot threaten. If you join the union, we will close the plant. Even if it's true, you can't say it, all right? If you join the union, you will be fired. That's a threat. Can't do it. 2, you can't interrogate. All right, I hear there's union cards being signed out here. All of you come over here and tell me whether you support the union or not. Can't do that. Interrogate. Don't do it. 3, promise. It's kind of the flip side of threaten. Okay, guys, I hear there's a union coming in. We don't want the union here, so I'll tell you what we're going to do. If you guys vote the union down, everybody gets a 2% raise, a 4% raise, a 6% raise. Promise, can't do that. And surveillance or spying. Hey, boss, I know what we'll do. Let's go to the union hall this weekend and see who shows up, because I hear there's a meeting. And then we'll know who supports the union and who doesn't. Spying, surveillance, you can't do that. All right? You need to communicate, but you can't do those things. 4 things, tips. Threaten, interrogate, promise, or surveil, spy. Now, you're going to want your supervisors to know this. You're going to want to talk to your supervisors about this, and you're going to want to do it now. Because as we go down this road with the NLRB, as they tighten up your ability to speak, if they do, that makes union organizing a full-time, all-the-time thing. And it makes your campaign to keep the union out and to keep your employees working and to keep them happy and all of that stuff a full-time job. So if you want to talk about this more, call your WN&J labor lawyer and we'll be happy to walk through it with you. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.